Robert Wilson's deadline was answered 3 minutes later when two security officers approached, accompanied by Linda Martinez. The nurse had briefed them quickly but thoroughly, emphasizing the potential for violence and the need to protect both Maya and the staff. "Dr. Pierce, there's an issue that requires your immediate attention," Linda said, her eyes briefly flicking to Robert Wilson. She had positioned herself strategically between Robert and the corridor leading to the ultrasound room, a small but significant barrier. Robert stood, sensing something was amiss. His face remained calm, but his eyes narrowed, taking in the security officers, the way Linda had stationed herself, the sudden tension in Dr. Pierce's posture. "What's going on here? Where's Maya? We're leaving." "Mr. Wilson," one of the security officers said, stepping forward, "we need you to remain here for a moment." Robert's face contorted with rage, the mask of concerned father dropping completely. "You can't keep me from my daughter. This is kidnapping." His voice rose, drawing the attention of patients in the nearby waiting room. A calculated move, Dr. Pierce realized, creating witnesses, manufacturing outrage, playing the role of the wronged parent. "No one is kidnapping anyone, sir," the officer replied. "We're simply asking you to wait here while we sort this out." Robert's right hand twitched toward his pocket, then stopped. His breathing quickened, but he forced a smile. "This is ridiculous. I'm taking my daughter home now." He took a step toward the hallway, but the security officers moved to block his path. "He's going to try to run," Linda thought, recognizing the signs from previous encounters with abusive partners in the emergency room. She caught the eye of the second security officer and gave a subtle nod toward the exit. Dr. Pierce seized the opportunity to slip away, hurrying back to the ultrasound room. Inside, he found Maya sitting up, her face tear-streaked but composed. Sarah stood beside her, one hand protectively on the girl's shoulder. "Maya, listen to me," he said urgently. "The police are on their way. You don't have to go home with him. We can protect you." For a moment, Maya said nothing. Her gaze dropped to her hands, which were twisting in her lap. "He has pictures," she finally whispered, her voice thick with shame. "On his computer, in case I ever tried to tell." The revelation hit Dr. Pierce like a physical blow. Not just the abuse itself, but the calculated documentation of it. Evidence that could be used to further traumatize and control the victim. "He won't be able to access those now," Dr. Pierce assured her, though his mind was racing with the implications. If Robert Wilson had documented the abuse, it would be damning evidence, but it also meant that Maya had been subjected to an additional layer of violation and exploitation. "Maya," Sarah said gently, "I recorded part of their conversation outside. Your father basically admitted that you couldn't have gotten pregnant by anyone else. It might help with the police." Maya looked up, surprised. "You recorded him?" For the first time, a flicker of something other than fear crossed her face, a fragile hope, quickly guarded, as if she didn't dare believe in it. "Evidence that isn't just my word against his," she thought, the realization sending a tremor through her body. Something they can't dismiss as a troubled teenager making things up. "I did," Sarah confirmed. "I know it might not be admissible in court, but it could help the investigation." She glanced at Dr. Pierce, who nodded approvingly. "This is good, Maya," he said. "Between the ultrasound, Sarah's recording, and what you've told us about the pictures, there's compelling evidence. You won't have to face this alone." In the waiting area, Robert Wilson's voice grew louder as he realized what was happening. The veneer of concerned fatherhood was cracking, revealing glimpses of the rage beneath. "This is outrageous! You can't keep a father from his child based on some teenage fantasy." He lunged toward the hallway, but the security officers moved quickly, each taking one of his arms. "Sir, you need to calm down," the taller officer said firmly. "Don't tell me to calm down," Robert spat, his face reddening. "My daughter is vulnerable and confused. She needs me." He struggled against their grip, then abruptly changed tactics, his body going slack. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice suddenly steady. "I'm just worried about Maya. She's been Unstable since her mother died. Making up stories, acting out. Linda Martinez watched this performance with disgust. She had seen this pattern before. The sudden mood shifts, the manufactured reasonableness, the subtle undermining of the victim's credibility. "The police will be here soon, Mr. Wilson," she said coolly. "I'm sure they'll sort everything out." Robert's eyes locked with hers, a flash of pure hatred quickly masked by a concerned smile. "Of course they will. I have nothing to hide." The security officers maintained their positions, preventing Robert from moving toward the examination rooms. Minutes ticked by in tense silence until two police officers arrived, directed by another nurse to the waiting area. "Mr. Wilson?" one of the officers asked. "I'm Officer Daniels. This is Officer Torres. We'd like to ask you some questions." "About what?" Robert demanded, though his voice had lost some of its previous confidence. "About your daughter, Maya. There have been some concerns raised about her welfare." Robert's demeanor shifted again, his anger giving way to a practiced concern. His shoulders slumped slightly, his expression softening into one of parental worry. "Maya has been going through a difficult time since her mother died. She's been acting out, making up stories. I've been trying to get her help, but she refuses." He rubbed his face wearily, a perfect portrait of a struggling single father. "How many times has he performed this exact routine?" Linda wondered, thinking of all the people who must have accepted his act over the years. Officer Torres made a note. "When did her mother pass away?" 3 years ago. Car accident." "And it's just been the two of you since then?" "Yes," Robert said, his voice softening. "It's been hard, raising a teenage girl alone, but we manage. We have our routines." Something in the way he said routines sent a chill down Linda's spine. While the officers continued questioning Robert, Dr. Pierce was joined in the ultrasound room by a social worker who had been called to the scene. Diane Fletcher had been working with Child Protective Services for 15 years and had seen cases like Maya's before. Too many times. "Maya, I'm Diane," she introduced herself, taking a seat beside the examination table. "I'm here to help you. Can you tell me what's been happening at home?" Maya's eyes darted to the door, her ingrained fear still controlling her actions. "He can't hurt you here," Diane assured her. "You're safe." Maya took a shuddering breath. "He'll say I'm crazy, that I made it all up." Just like he did with Mom, she thought bitterly, when she tried to tell her friend about the things he did to her. How he convinced everyone she was unstable, paranoid. "The ultrasound shows you're pregnant, Maya. That's not something you made up." Diane's voice was gentle but firm. "Has your father been hurting you?" The question hung in the air, the truth too monstrous to be easily spoken. Maya's silence was answer enough. The silence, between us. She could barely look at her father. And when the ultrasound machine came on, the doctor turned pale. The fluorescent lights of Westbrook Community Clinic hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the examination room. Dr. Nathan Pierce had seen thousands of patients in his 23 years of practice, but something about this case made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. 16-year-old Maya Wilson sat perched on the edge of the examination table, her shoulders hunched forward as if carrying an invisible weight. Her father, Robert Wilson, stood near the door, arms crossed over his chest, his presence filling the small room. "Don't look up, just keep breathing. If you look at him, he'll know what you're thinking," Maya told herself. The internal mantra that had become her constant companion. "Maya, can you tell me again about the stomach pains?" Dr. Pierce asked, his voice deliberately gentle. The girl's eyes remained fixed on the linoleum floor. Her fingers twisted the hem of her oversized sweater, despite the late spring heat outside. She said nothing. This was their third visit in as many months, and Maya had spoken fewer words each time. "She's been like this for weeks now," her father interjected, his voice carrying a rehearsed concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. He stepped closer to the examination table, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder that to anyone else might have appeared supportive. Maya's subtle flinch was almost imperceptible. "Not eating, staying in her room. I thought it was just teenage stuff, you know? But then the stomach issues started." Dr. Pierce noticed how Robert's fingers pressed a little too firmly into his daughter's shoulder, how his thumb moved in small circles that seemed more possessive than comforting. The gesture reminded him of someone handling an object rather than comforting a child. "I've been taking care of her medication myself," Robert added unprompted, his tone suggesting exceptional fatherly dedication. "Making sure she takes it at the right times, monitoring any side effects. I keep very careful records." Dr. Pierce nodded, making a note in Maya's file. "And your wife? Will she be joining us today?" A flash of something, anger, annoyance, crossed Robert Wilson's face. His jaw tightened, a vein momentarily visible at his temple. "As I've mentioned before, Doctor, my wife passed away 3 years ago. It's just Maya and me." "She was always making things up," Robert added, with a dismissive wave, though no one had suggested otherwise. "Hypochondriac, really. That's why I'm concerned about Maya developing similar tendencies." "I apologize, Mr. Wilson. I must have confused your file with another." Dr. Pierce hadn't confused anything. He was watching Maya's reaction. At the mention of her mother, her shoulders had tensed even further, and her right hand had moved to her wrist, unconsciously rubbing a spot where a faded bruise was partially visible beneath her sleeve. Mom tried to tell people, Maya thought, the memory surfacing against her will. They didn't believe her either. "Maya, I'd like to examine your abdomen if that's okay." Dr. Pierce moved slowly, telegraphing his intentions. When he reached toward her midsection, the girl flinched, a barely perceptible movement that spoke volumes. "Mr. Wilson, would you mind stepping outside for a moment? Standard procedure for examining teenage patients." Robert Wilson's jaw tightened. A shadow passed over his face as his eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't think that's necessary. She's my daughter." The emphasis he placed on the word "my" lingered in the air like a claim of ownership rather than relationship. "I understand, but it's clinic policy. Just for a few minutes." Dr. Pierce kept his tone professional, neutral, but his eyes conveyed something else entirely. Robert's hand moved to Maya's hair, tucking a strand behind her ear with a gentleness that somehow felt threatening. "You'll be fine without me for a minute, won't you, Maya Bear?" The nickname carried an undercurrent that made Dr. Pierce's skin crawl. "Don't go. Please don't leave me alone with him," Maya thought desperately, even as she nodded mechanically, trained to agree with whatever her father said. After a moment of tension, Robert relented. "Fine, I'll be right outside, Maya." The way he said her name sounded like both a promise and a warning. At the door he paused, turning back. "Remember what we talked about this morning?" he said softly, his gaze holding hers until she nodded again. The moment the door closed behind him, Dr. Pierce noticed Maya's breathing change, the slightest relaxation of her posture. Not much, but enough. "Maya, you're safe here. Whatever's happening, I want to help you." He waited, but she remained silent. "I'm going to examine your abdomen now, is that all right?" A barely perceptible nod. "Maya, you're safe here. Whatever's happening, I want to help you." He waited, but she remained silent. "I'm going to examine your abdomen now. Is that all right?" A barely perceptible nod. When Dr. Pierce gently pressed on her lower abdomen, Maya winced. But it wasn't just pain he was registering. There was a firmness there, a slight distension that concerned him. As he continued his examination, he noticed faded bruises on her wrists, partially hidden by her sleeves. Some were newer than others, yellowing at the edges. There were small circular marks that looked like cigarette burns along her inner arm. "Maya, I'd like to run some tests today, including an ultrasound. Would that be okay?" For the first time, Maya looked up, her eyes meeting his. The fear he saw there made his heart sink. But behind the fear was something else, a desperate plea. "Please see what's happening. Please be different from the others who looked away, Maya thought, allowing herself a moment of hope that felt dangerous. He'll know, she whispered so quietly he almost missed it. Know what, Maya? She glanced at the door, then back at Dr. Pierce. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach in a protective gesture that triggered an alarm in Dr. Pierce's mind. The last time someone tried to help, he found out. Maya's voice was barely audible. Mom's car. It wasn't an accident. But her eyes had already returned to the floor, the brief moment of connection severed. Dr. Pierce made his decision. I'm going to schedule that ultrasound for today. Right now, actually. He picked up the phone and made the call, arranging for immediate imaging. Then he stepped out to speak with Robert Wilson. Robert was pacing the hallway, checking his watch repeatedly. When he saw Dr. Pierce, he immediately straightened, putting on a concerned father expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. Is she okay? What's taking so long? Mr. Wilson, I'm concerned about Maya's abdominal pain. I've scheduled an ultrasound to rule out any serious issues. Is that really necessary? We've already missed half a day of work and school for this appointment. A flicker of irritation crossed Robert's face. He lowered his voice, leaning in closer to Dr. Pierce. Between you and me, Doctor, Maya has become quite the little actress since her mother died. Always looking for attention. I'm sure it's nothing serious. I believe it is necessary, yes. Dr. Pierce maintained eye contact, unflinching. Something about the way Robert dismissed his daughter's pain felt calculated, designed to discourage further investigation. The technician can take her now. It shouldn't take long. Robert's eyes narrowed slightly, his smile tightening. Well, if you insist, I suppose it's better to be thorough. He checked his watch again. But after this, we really need to get going. Maya has piano lessons this afternoon. Maya doesn't play piano, Dr. Pierce thought, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. 30 minutes later, in the dimly lit ultrasound room, the technician's face changed as she moved the transducer across Maya's abdomen. She excused herself and returned with Dr. Pierce. The doctor took one look at the screen and felt his stomach drop. Maya was approximately 14 weeks pregnant. When Dr. Pierce turned to look at the girl, he saw tears silently streaming down her face. But it wasn't shock he saw there. It was resignation. She knew. She had known all along. He'll kill me now, Maya thought, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. He'll kill us both. Maya, he said softly, I need to ask you something very important, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you safe at home? Her eyes darted to the door, where her father waited on the other side. In her mind, she saw flashes of the last 3 years, the doors removed from hinges, the whispered threats, the nights she pretended to be asleep as her bedroom door creaked open. The feeling of being trapped in her own body as something precious was stolen from her night after night. And in that single, terrified glance, Dr. Nathan Pierce understood everything. 5 months earlier, the Wilson house on Maple Street appeared like any other in the quiet suburb of Westbrook. 2 stories of faded red brick, a neatly trimmed lawn, and curtains that were always drawn. Neighbors described Robert Wilson as private and devoted to his daughter, phrases that would later curdle in the retelling. He was always checking on her, Mrs. Greenberg from next door would later tell police. Always knew where she was, who she was with. I thought it was sweet, you know, especially after losing his wife like that. What Mrs. Greenberg didn't mention initially was how she'd once seen Robert Wilson grip Maya's arm so tightly the girl winced as he guided her into the house, or how she'd heard muffled crying through the vents that connected their houses on more than one occasion, or the time she'd offered Maya a ride home from the grocery store, only to have Robert appear suddenly in his car, insisting he'd been looking everywhere for his daughter. You gave us quite a scare, Maya Bear, he'd said, his smile not reaching his eyes. You know you're supposed to call me if your plans change. His hand had rested on the back of her neck as he spoke, fingers flexing slightly. Maya's days followed a strict routine. Wake at 6 a.m., prepare breakfast for her father, attend school, return home immediately after the final bell. No extracurricular activities, no friends visiting, no social media accounts. Her father checked her phone every night before bed. For her safety, he said. "It's just us against the world now, Maya Bear," Robert would tell her, using the childhood nickname that once made her feel safe, but now made her skin crawl. "We have to look out for each other." But the way he looked at her had changed. It started with lingering glances as she moved around the house. Then came the comments about how she was becoming a woman, how she looked just like her mother at that age. He began accidentally walking in while she was changing or showering, apologizing with a smile that never seemed genuine. Since her mother's death, a car accident that occurred while she was driving to her sister's house after what neighbors described as a terrible argument with Robert, the walls of their home had seemed to close in a little more each day. Robert had transferred Maya to a new school, one further from their home but with better academic standards, he explained to the few who asked. The truth was that the new school knew nothing about Maya's previous life, her previous friends, her previous self. No one there remembered the outgoing girl who used to perform in school plays, or the way her mother would sit in the front row, recording every moment. The new school knew only the silent girl who excelled in written assignments but never raised her hand, who ate lunch alone and disappeared the moment classes ended. At home, the silence between father and daughter grew heavier, punctuated by Robert's increasingly controlling behavior. Maya's bedroom door had been removed. "To prevent teenage sulking," Robert explained to his brother during his rare visits. Her clothing choices were subject to approval, her meals portioned and monitored. "You're looking more like your mother every day," Robert would say, his eyes following her in a way that made Maya want to disappear into the walls. The first time it happened, Maya had been asleep. She awoke to the weight of someone sitting on her bed, the smell of whiskey hanging in the air. "You look so much like her," her father had whispered. "Sometimes I forget she's gone." Afterward, Maya spent hours in the shower, the water scalding hot, but she couldn't wash away the feeling of being fundamentally changed, broken in a way that could never be repaired. She told herself it was a nightmare, a terrible dream that her mind had conjured. But the nightmare returned, again and again, until the line between sleeping and waking horror blurred completely. At school, Maya withdrew further into herself. Her English teacher, Mrs. Calloway, noticed the change. Once, after class, she tried to reach out. "Maya, is everything all right at home?" she had asked, concern evident in her voice. Maya had frozen, her father's warnings echoing in her mind. "Family business stays in the family. No one would understand. They'd separate us. Is that what you want?" "Everything's fine," Maya had replied, the lie bitter on her tongue. "I'm just tired." Mrs. Calloway had seemed unconvinced but didn't press further. Another missed opportunity. Another adult who sensed something wrong but didn't push past the carefully constructed facade. As winter turned to spring, Maya's body began to betray her. The morning sickness came first, followed by the subtle changes that she desperately tried to hide beneath loose clothing. She knew with a certainty that hollowed her from the inside out what was happening. But acknowledging it, even to herself, meant accepting a reality too horrific to bear. When the stomach pains began, sharp, cramping sensations that left her doubled over, Robert had no choice but to take her to a doctor. He chose Westbrook Community Clinic, nearly 30 minutes from their home, where no one knew them. During their first visit, Dr. Pierce had noted Maya's reluctance to speak, the way she deferred to her father for every answer. He recognized the signs of emotional distress, but had no concrete evidence of anything more sinister. Still, something about the dynamics between father and daughter troubled him deeply. By the third visit, when Maya's symptoms had only worsened, Dr. Pierce's concerns had solidified into something more definite. The way Maya flinched at sudden movements, her persistent silence, the controlling behavior of her father, all classic warning signs that Dr. Pierce had been trained to recognize. But even with his training and experience, nothing had prepared him for what the ultrasound revealed that day in late spring, or for the silent plea in Maya's eyes when he asked if she was safe. The door to the ultrasound room opened, and Robert Wilson stepped in without invitation. "What's taking so long?" he demanded, his eyes darting between the doctor, the technician, and his daughter. "What's wrong with her?" Dr. Pierce stepped between Robert and the examination table where Maya lay, her arms now protectively crossed over her abdomen. "Mr. Wilson, I need to speak with you outside." "Just tell me what's going on." Robert's voice rose. "She's my daughter. I have a right to know." The possessive emphasis on "my" sent a chill down the technician's spine. Sarah Knowles had been performing ultrasounds for 12 years, and something about Robert Wilson's demeanor triggered every warning bell in her mind. As Dr. Pierce guided Robert toward the door, Sarah made a split-second decision. She reached for her phone, keeping it partially hidden behind the ultrasound machine, and pressed record. If her instincts were right, this conversation might be important later. "Outside, please." Dr. Pierce's tone left no room for argument. He nodded to the technician, a silent instruction to stay with Maya. In the hallway, Dr. Pierce closed the door behind them. "Mr. Wilson, the ultrasound has revealed something concerning. Maya is pregnant." Robert's face went through a rapid succession of emotions: shock, confusion, and then something darker, more calculated. "That's impossible. She doesn't date. She doesn't go anywhere except school and home." "Nevertheless, she is approximately 14 weeks pregnant." Robert's expression hardened. "I want to see that ultrasound. Mr. Wilson, given the circumstances, I have some concerns about Maya's well-being." "What exactly are you implying, doctor?" Robert stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Sarah, still recording on her phone, pressed it against the door to capture the conversation. "My daughter is obviously lying. She's been sneaking around behind my back. After everything I've done for her." "Everything you've done to her, you mean?" Sarah thought, her stomach churning as she caught Maya's eye. The girl's gaze was fixed on the door, her body trembling slightly. "I haven't spoken with Maya about how this happened," Dr. Pierce said carefully. "But as her physician, I am obligated to ensure her safety. She's perfectly safe with me. I'm her father." The word father seemed to catch in Robert's throat. "We're leaving. Now." Dr. Pierce knew he couldn't legally prevent them from leaving, but he also knew he couldn't let Maya walk out that door with this man. "Before you go, I need to complete some paperwork. Hospital policy for minors. It will just take a few minutes." It was a stalling tactic, but it worked. Robert stepped back, his jaw tight. "Fine, make it quick." Inside the room, Sarah quickly ended the recording and slipped her phone into her pocket. "Maya," she whispered, moving closer to the girl. "Has your father been hurting you?" Maya's eyes widened in fear, but she remained silent. "We want to help you," Sarah continued, her voice urgent but gentle. "But we need to know what's happening." Maya's gaze darted to the door again, then back to Sarah. "He'll kill me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "If he knows I told anyone." Sarah nodded, understanding the terrified girl's fear. "I recorded their conversation," she said quietly. "If you're in danger, this could help." For the briefest moment, something flickered in Maya's eyes, a spark of hope that had been extinguished for so long she barely recognized it. Dr. Pierce walked briskly to the nurse's station, where he scribbled a note to the charge nurse. "Call security and police. Patient Maya Wilson, 16, pregnant, suspected abuse by father. Stalling in room 4. The charge nurse, Linda Martinez, read the note and immediately reached for the phone. There was no hesitation in her movements. In her 20 years of nursing, she had developed an instinct for these situations. "Doctor," Pierce returned to Robert Wilson, who was pacing the hallway like a caged animal. "The forms are being prepared. It should just be a few more minutes. Dr. Pierce led Robert to a small waiting area, positioning himself between the man and the ultrasound room door. "Can I get you some water while we wait?" Robert declined, his eyes constantly moving between Dr. Pierce and the door to the room where Maya remained with the technician. The doctor noticed how Robert's right hand kept clenching and unclenching, how he would glance at his watch and then toward the exit, calculating. "You know, doctor," Robert said suddenly, his voice low and confidential, "Maya has always been a troubled girl. After her mother died, she started making up stories. Attention-seeking behavior, the grief counselor called it." Dr. Pierce maintained a calm facade, but his heart was racing. "That must have been difficult for both of you." "You have no idea." Robert leaned closer, as if sharing a burden with another man who would understand. "She once told her school counselor I was too strict. Can you believe that? Because I check her phone, make sure she's not talking to strangers online. Because I care enough to know where she is and who she's with." The practiced speech had the air of something Robert had said many times before, perhaps to teachers or previous doctors who had noticed something amiss. "Teenagers need boundaries," Robert continued, his eyes never quite meeting Dr. Pierce's. "Elizabeth, my wife, she was too soft with Maya. Let her get away with anything. That's why I had to step in, be the disciplinarian. Not an easy role, but someone has to do it." Dr. Pierce nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He needed to buy time, just enough for help to arrive. Inside the ultrasound room, Sarah Knowles was carefully preparing Maya to leave. "We're going to move you to another room," she explained quietly, "just for some additional tests." Maya's eyes, haunted and exhausted, met Sarah's. "You don't know him," she whispered. "He'll find a way. He always does when people start asking questions." "I remember that night," Maya thought, her mind drifting to the memory she had suppressed for so long. Mom on the phone with Aunt Catherine whispering that we were finally leaving, the sound of the bedroom door opening. Dad standing there listening. The look on his face. Sarah's training hadn't prepared her for this, but her instincts as a mother of two teenage girls kicked in. "We won't let that happen. Dr. Pierce is getting help right now." "He killed her, you know," Maya whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "My mom. Everyone thinks it was an accident, but—" Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, Maya?" "The night she died, she told him she knew what he was doing to me, that she was taking me away." Maya's voice was flat, dissociated, as if she was reciting something that had happened to someone else. "The next morning he told me she'd died in a car crash, that she'd been drinking, but Mom never drank." Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral despite the horror rising within her. She reached for Maya's hand, squeezing it gently. "We're going to get you somewhere safe, I promise." In the waiting area, Robert Wilson's patience was wearing thin. "What's taking so long with these forms?" he demanded. "Hospital bureaucracy," Dr. Pierce said with a forced smile. "Always slower than we'd like." Robert checked his watch. 5 more minutes, then we're leaving, paperwork or not." There was a coldness in his eyes that belied his pleasant tone. "Maya has an appointment with her tutor this afternoon. She's been falling behind in math lately. Distracted. Distracted by the pregnancy you caused," Dr. Pierce thought, struggling to maintain his professional demeanor. "By the trauma you've inflicted." "Of course," he said aloud. "We're almost done." Dr. Pierce nodded, silently praying that security would arrive before Robert's deadline. His prayer was answered 3 minutes later when 2 security officers approached, accompanied by Linda Martinez. "Dr. Pierce, there's an issue that requires your immediate attention," Linda said, her eyes briefly flicking to Robert Wilson. Robert stood, sensing something was amiss. "What's going on here? Where's Maya? We're leaving." "Mr. Wilson," one of the security officers said, stepping forward, "we need you to remain here for a moment." Robert's face contorted with rage. "You can't keep me from my daughter. This is kidnapping." No one is kidnapping anyone, sir, the officer replied. We're simply asking you to wait here while we sort this out. Dr. Pierce seized the opportunity to slip away, hurrying back to the ultrasound room. Inside, he found Maya sitting up, her face tear-streaked but composed. Maya, listen to me, he said urgently. The police are on their way. You don't have to go home with him. We can protect you. For a moment, Maya said nothing. Then, so quietly, Dr. Pierce had to lean in to hear. He'll say I'm lying. He always says I make things up, like my mom did. The ultrasound doesn't lie, Maya, and neither do those bruises on your arms. In the waiting area, Robert Wilson's voice grew louder as he realized what was happening. This is outrageous. You can't keep a father from his child based on some teenage fantasy. The security officers maintained their positions, preventing Robert from moving toward the examination rooms. Minutes ticked by in tense silence until 2 police officers arrived, directed by Linda Martinez to the waiting area. Mr. Wilson? One of the officers asked. I'm Officer Daniels. This is Officer Torres. We'd like to ask you some questions. About what? Robert demanded, though his voice had lost some of its previous confidence. About your daughter, Maya. There have been some concerns raised about her welfare. Robert's demeanor shifted, his anger giving way to a practiced concern. Maya has been going through a difficult time since her mother died. She's been acting out, making up stories. I've been trying to get her help, but she refuses. Officer Torres made a note. When did her mother pass away? 3 years ago, car accident. And it's just been the 2 of you since then? Yes, Robert said, his voice softening. It's been hard, raising a teenage girl alone, but we manage. While the officers continued questioning Robert, Dr. Pierce was joined in the ultrasound room by a social worker who had been called to the scene. Diane Fletcher had been working with Child Protective Services for 15 years and had seen cases like Maya's before, too many times. Maya, I'm Diane, she introduced herself, taking a seat beside the examination table. I'm here to help you. Can you tell me what's been happening at home? Maya's eyes darted to the door, her ingrained fear still controlling her actions. He can't hurt you here, Diane assured her. You're safe. Maya took a shuddering breath. He'll say I'm crazy, that I made it all up. The ultrasound shows you're pregnant, Maya. That's not something you made up. Diane's voice was gentle but firm. Has your father been hurting you? The question hung in the air, the truth too monstrous to be easily spoken. Maya's silence was answer enough. You don't have to go back there, Diane said. We can find you a safe place to stay. Maya looked up, a flicker of hope quickly extinguished by years of conditioned fear. He'll find me. He always says no one will believe me. No one will believe you, Maya Bear. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. You're just a kid. I'm a respected member of this community. Who do you think they'll listen to? The memory of his whispered threats as he tucked her in at night made her stomach clench. I believe you, Diane said. Dr. Pierce believes you. Sarah believes you. And the evidence will make others believe you too. Maya glanced at Sarah, who gave her an encouraging nod. Then at Dr. Pierce, whose kind eyes held no judgment, only concern. For the first time in years, she felt something other than despair. A tiny spark of possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could escape. In the waiting area, the questioning continued. Officer Daniels had received a call on his radio and stepped away briefly before returning with a more serious expression. Mr. Wilson, we're going to need you to come down to the station to answer some additional questions. Robert's facade began to crack. On what grounds? This is harassment. Sir, we have reason to believe that your daughter may be the victim of abuse. Abuse? That's absurd. Who's making these accusations? That doctor? He barely knows us. Robert's voice rose again, his carefully constructed persona of the concerned father slipping. This is a misunderstanding. Maya has been troubled since her mother died. She makes things up for attention. Your daughter is 14 weeks pregnant, Mr. Wilson, Officer Daniels said, his voice hard. And given that you claim she never goes anywhere except school and home, the implication hung in the air, undeniable. Robert's face drained of color. His eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route. She's lying. She must have been sneaking out, meeting boys somewhere. We'll sort all that out at the station. Sir. Officer Torres moved forward, hand on his handcuffs. Please come with us. This is outrageous, Robert sputtered, but the fight seemed to be draining from him as the reality of his situation began to sink in. I want a lawyer. I'm not saying another word without a lawyer. As Robert Wilson was led away, his composure finally shattered. Maya, he shouted. Tell them the truth. Tell them you've been lying. His voice echoed down the corridor, but Maya couldn't hear him. She had already been moved to a private room where Diane Fletcher was gently guiding her through the beginning of a process that would eventually bring the whole truth to light. Linda Martinez watched as the police officers escorted Robert Wilson out of the clinic. For a moment, their eyes met, and what she saw there, a cold, calculating hatred, confirmed everything she had suspected. This was a man who had been hiding his true nature for years, a predator disguised as a protector. I've seen that look before, she thought, remembering other cases from her years in nursing. The mask slipping when they realize they've been caught. As the doors closed behind them, Linda felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Maya was safe, at least for now. The system that had failed her for so long was finally beginning to work as it should. But Linda knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead for Maya would be long and difficult. Recovery from such profound trauma would not come easily or quickly. And there were still questions to be answered about Elizabeth Wilson's death. Questions that Linda was determined to help investigate. For now, though, a small victory had been won. A vulnerable girl had been seen and heard, perhaps for the first time in years. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. The Westbrook Community Clinic case, as it came to be known, didn't end with Robert Wilson's arrest. In many ways, that was just the beginning. Linda Martinez, the charge nurse who had called security, couldn't shake the haunted look in Maya's eyes. After her shift ended, she found herself pulling up old news articles about the death of Elizabeth Wilson, Maya's mother. The official report stated that Elizabeth had died when her car struck a tree on a rainy night 3 years earlier. The accident had occurred on River Road, a winding stretch of asphalt that ran alongside the Westbrook River. Elizabeth had been traveling to her sister's house late at night. The police report noted that alcohol had not been a factor, and road conditions were poor due to the rain. But something about the story nagged at Linda. Why had Elizabeth been going to her sister's house so late at night? And why had no one from the sister's family spoken up during the subsequent years when Maya was living alone with her father? Linda began digging deeper, reaching out to contacts at other hospitals where she had worked. A former colleague at Riverside Memorial, the hospital where Elizabeth Wilson had been taken after her accident, remembered the case. The injuries weren't entirely consistent with the crash, her colleague Dr. James Chen told her over the phone. There were older bruises, healed fractures that had never been properly treated. The kind of injuries we're trained to flag as potential domestic abuse. But since she didn't survive, and there was no one pushing for an investigation, the case had been closed, the death ruled accidental, and Maya had been left alone with the man who had likely been abusing her mother as well. Meanwhile, at Westbrook Police Department, Detective Sarah Reeves was assigned to Maya's case. She had worked dozens of sexual abuse cases over her 14-year career, but few had affected her as deeply as this one. Maya, I know this is difficult, Detective Reeves said during their first interview at a local child advocacy center, but I need you to tell me, in your own words, what happened. Maya sat across from her, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the table between them. A female victim advocate sat nearby, offering silent support. It started after Mom died, Maya finally said, her voice barely audible. Not right away. At first he was just sad, Angry. He started drinking more. Then he got stricter, checking my phone, my computer. He said it was to keep me safe. She paused, gathering strength to continue. He moved my bedroom door. Said I didn't need privacy, that privacy led to secrets, and secrets destroyed families. Detective Reeves took notes, letting Maya set the pace. The first time was about a year after Mom died. I was asleep. He came in, sat on my bed. He smelled like whiskey. Maya's voice faltered. He said I looked like her, like Mom, that sometimes he forgot she was gone. The story unfolded in halting fragments: the isolation from friends, the transfer to a new school, the escalating control and abuse. Maya described how her father convinced her that no one would believe her, that she would be taken away and put into foster care, that she would lose everything. When I missed my period, I knew, Maya said, tears streaming down her face. I tried to pretend it wasn't happening. I thought maybe if I ignored it, it would go away. But then the pain started. Did you tell anyone? A teacher? A friend? Detective Reeves asked. Maya shook her head. He always said people would think I was crazy, like Mom. That's what he told everyone about her, that she made things up, that she was unstable. While Maya's interview was being conducted, another detective was executing a search warrant at the Wilson home. What they found painted a disturbing picture of Maya's life since her mother's death. The house was immaculate, obsessively so, with no personal touches or photographs displayed. Maya's bedroom had no door as she had described. Her clothing was neatly arranged by color and style, all modest, nothing that could be considered remotely revealing. But the most damning evidence came from Robert Wilson's computer. Hidden within encrypted files were photographs, hundreds of them, documenting the abuse of his daughter over the course of nearly 2 years. Robert had meticulously recorded his crimes, a fact that would later prove crucial in securing his conviction without requiring Maya to testify in court. As the investigation continued, more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Elizabeth Wilson's sister, Catherine Moore, came forward after learning of Robert's arrest. She had been estranged from her sister for years before Elizabeth's death, a separation engineered by Robert, who had systematically isolated his wife from her family. The night she died, she called me, Catherine told Detective Reeves, her voice thick with years of guilt and grief. She said she was finally leaving him, that she was bringing Maya to stay with me. She said she had evidence of what he'd been doing to her, that she was going to go to the police the next day. Elizabeth never made it to her sister's house. Her car was found wrapped around a tree, the impact on the driver's side. No other vehicles were involved, according to the official report. I tried to find Maya after the funeral, Catherine continued. But Robert had moved them, changed their phone number. I hired a private investigator, but by the time we located them, Robert had gotten a restraining order against me, claiming I was mentally unstable and a danger to Maya. Catherine wiped away tears. I should have tried harder. I should have known he would hurt her too. The case against Robert Wilson grew stronger by the day. DNA testing confirmed that he was the father of Maya's unborn child, removing any lingering doubt about her allegations. Bank records showed he had been withdrawing large sums of cash in the months before Elizabeth's death, money that was never accounted for, and raised questions about whether he had tampered with her car before the fatal accident. Through it all, Maya remained in a temporary foster placement, her future uncertain. The pregnancy presented additional complications. She was now 16 weeks along, and a decision needed to be made. "What do you want to do, Maya?" Diane Fletcher asked during one of their regular sessions. "About the pregnancy. I mean, you have options." Maya placed a protective hand over her abdomen. "I don't know," she admitted. "I know what happened is wrong, horrible, but it's not the baby's fault." Diane nodded. "That's true, but you're very young, and this is a lot to deal with. No one would judge you if you decided not to continue with the pregnancy." "Would I have to give it up? If I had it?" Maya asked. Not necessarily. There are support programs for young mothers, but you should know that parenting would be extremely challenging, especially given everything you've been through. Maya was silent for a long moment. I need time to think about it. Diane reached over and squeezed her hand. You have time, and whatever you decide, you won't be alone. It was the first time in years that Maya believed those words. 3 months after Maya's visit to Westbrook Community Clinic, Robert Wilson's case never made it to trial. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, he accepted a plea deal that would ensure he spent at least 25 years in prison. The deal spared Maya from having to testify against her father in open court, a trauma that everyone involved wanted to help her avoid. As part of the investigation, Elizabeth Wilson's death was reopened and reclassified as a suspected homicide. Though concrete evidence was difficult to establish after 3 years, forensic experts found enough irregularities in the original accident report to suggest that her car had been tampered with before the crash. Maya, now living with her Aunt Catherine, had decided to continue with the pregnancy. The decision had not been made lightly, and she underwent extensive counseling to ensure she understood the challenges ahead. I know it's going to be hard, she told Diane during one of their sessions, but I've spent so many years having choices taken away from me. This is my choice. Catherine had fully supported her niece's decision, converting her home office into a nursery and enrolling in parenting classes alongside Maya. We're figuring this out together, she told Maya, one day at a time. Dr. Nathan Pierce, whose intervention had set the entire case in motion, kept in touch with Maya throughout her pregnancy. He had arranged for her to see an excellent obstetrician who specialized in high-risk and trauma-sensitive care. You saved my life, Maya told him during a follow-up visit. If you hadn't noticed, if you hadn't done something, you saved yourself, Maya, Dr. Pierce replied. You were brave enough to let us help you. Maya shook her head. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. Being afraid and doing the right thing anyway, that's the definition of courage. For the first time in their acquaintance, Dr. Pierce saw Maya smile. It was small and fleeting, but it was there, a glimpse of the person she might have been without the years of trauma, and perhaps the person she might still become. In late October, Maya gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Elizabeth after the mother she had lost, the mother who had tried to save her. The story of Maya Wilson became a turning point for Westbrook Community. The case highlighted failures in the system, how a teenage girl could be systematically isolated and abused for years without intervention, how the suspicious death of her mother had been too quickly dismissed, how warning signs had been missed by teachers, neighbors, and medical professionals. In response, the school district implemented more rigorous training for teachers to recognize signs of abuse. Westbrook Community Clinic established new protocols for examining teenage patients. The police department revised its procedures for investigating accidental deaths, particularly when children were left in potentially vulnerable situations. Small changes, perhaps, but changes that might make a difference for the next child in need. 1 year after Maya's visit to Dr. Pierce, a small gathering was held at Catherine Moore's home. In attendance were the key figures who had helped bring Robert Wilson to justice: Dr. Pierce, Nurse Linda Martinez, ultrasound technician Sarah Knowles, Detective Sarah Reeves, and social worker Diane Fletcher. They had come to celebrate Maya's 17th birthday, likely the first birthday she had truly celebrated since her mother's death. The house was decorated with streamers and balloons, and a chocolate cake sat on the dining room table. In a playpen nearby, baby Elizabeth cooed and reached for colorful toys, blissfully unaware of the circumstances of her birth or the significance of the gathering around her. Maya, now a junior in high school, looked different than she had a year ago. She stood straighter, her eyes meeting those of the adults around her without fear. She was catching up on the education she had missed, with plans to graduate on time despite the challenges of young motherhood. I want to thank all of you, Maya said, her voice stronger than any of them had heard before. Not just for what you did that day at the clinic, but for everything since. For believing me when I could barely believe myself." Dr. Pierce watched as Maya moved around the room, speaking individually to each person who had played a role in her rescue. The transformation was remarkable. Not complete, certainly, as the road to recovery from such profound trauma would be long and undoubtedly difficult. But the change was real, and it gave him hope. Linda Martinez approached him, a cup of coffee in hand. "I still think about that day," she said quietly. "How close she came to walking out that door with him." Dr. Pierce nodded. "I think about it too. All the little decisions that led to her being in my exam room, to the ultrasound, to you making that call." "Do you think she'll be okay?" Linda asked, watching as Maya bent down to lift baby Elizabeth from the playpen. "I think she has a chance now," Dr. Pierce replied. "And that's more than she had before." As the gathering wound down, Maya found herself standing alone with Detective Reeves on the back porch, watching as the sun began to set over the trees. "There's something I never told you," Maya said. "About that day at the clinic." Detective Reeves waited, giving Maya the space to continue in her own time. "I had decided that was the last day," Maya said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "If no one noticed, if no one helped, I wasn't going to go home with him again. I had it all planned out." The implication was clear, and Detective Reeves felt a chill despite the warm evening air. "But someone did notice," she said softly. Maya nodded. "Dr. Pierce saw me, really saw me. And then all of you—" She gestured back toward the house, where the others were gathering their things, preparing to leave. "You all listened. You heard me, even when I couldn't speak." The two stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what might have been lost. "You know," Detective Reeves finally said, "in all my years doing this job, the hardest cases are the ones where we're too late, where we find out what was happening only after it's over. Your story is different, Maya. Your story gives us hope." Maya looked back at the house, where her aunt was holding baby Elizabeth, making silly faces that elicited giggles from the infant. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real," she admitted. "That I got out, that I have a future." "You do have a future," Detective Reeves assured her. "And from what I've seen, it's going to be a bright one." Inside the house, Dr. Nathan Pierce prepared to leave, collecting his coat from the rack by the front door. As he did, he noticed a small framed photo on the entryway table that hadn't been there during his last visit. It showed Maya, Catherine, and baby Elizabeth, their faces alight with tentative joy. Next to it was a handwritten note, framed in simple black. She spent months in silence, but in that examination room it took just one look, and the world began to listen. Dr. Pierce touched the frame lightly, remembering the frightened girl who had sat on his examination table 1 year ago, unable to meet his eyes. The journey from that moment to this one had been arduous, filled with pain and difficult truths. But it had led here, to this house filled with light and possibility, where a young woman was slowly reclaiming her voice and her life. As a doctor, he had been trained to look for symptoms, to diagnose and treat. But Maya's case had reminded him of something more fundamental, the importance of truly seeing the person before him, of listening to what remained unspoken, and of having the courage to act on what he observed. In the quiet moments when doubt crept in, when the weight of his responsibility felt overwhelming, Dr. Pierce would remember Maya Wilson, and the difference that one careful observation had made, not just in her life, but in the lives of all those she would touch in the years to come, including the daughter who might never have been born, had that day gone differently. As he stepped out into the evening air, Dr. Pierce made a silent promise to himself, to keep looking, to keep listening, to keep noticing the silent cries for help that too often went unheard. Because sometimes, as Maya's story had proven, noticing was the difference between tragedy and hope, between an ending and a new beginning. And in a world where darkness often seemed to prevail, That made all the difference. The case of Maya Wilson would eventually become the subject of training materials for medical professionals across the country. Dr. Nathan Pierce, with Maya's permission, developed a presentation on recognizing subtle signs of abuse, particularly in adolescent patients who may be unable or unwilling to verbalize their situation. When Maya first came to my office, there were dozens of small indicators that something was wrong. Dr. Pierce would explain to rooms full of attentive doctors, nurses, and medical students. No single sign was definitive on its own, but together they formed a pattern that couldn't be ignored. He emphasized how crucial it was to observe the dynamics between patients and their caregivers, to create opportunities for private conversation, and to trust the instincts that develop over years of practice. The ultrasound that day had revealed not just a pregnancy, but a system that had failed a vulnerable child for years. Linda Martinez, who had been instrumental in coordinating the clinic's response, often joined Dr. Pierce for these presentations. Medical professionals are often the only outsiders who get to see these families up close, she would tell the audience. We might be the only chance someone like Maya has. The ripple effects of the case extended beyond the medical community. Detective Sarah Reeves worked with the district attorney's office to establish a specialized unit for investigating familial abuse cases, ensuring that victims like Maya would have dedicated advocates from the moment allegations emerged. Diane Fletcher used her experience with Maya to lobby for policy changes within the child welfare system, particularly addressing the gaps that had allowed Robert Wilson to isolate his daughter so completely after her mother's death. The resulting legislation, informally known as Maya's Law, strengthened oversight of single parents who had previously been investigated for domestic violence, even if those investigations had not led to charges. For Sarah Knowles, the ultrasound technician who had first discovered Maya's pregnancy, the case became a catalyst for a career change. She returned to school to become a forensic nurse, specializing in examining victims of sexual assault and abuse. I keep thinking about what would have happened if Maya had been seen by someone less experienced, someone who might have missed the signs or been too afraid to act, Sarah explained during an interview for a documentary about the case. I wanted to make sure I never missed those signs again. But perhaps the most profound transformation was in Maya herself. The recovery process was neither linear nor easy. There were nightmares, panic attacks, days when the weight of her trauma and the responsibilities of young motherhood seemed overwhelming. But there was also growth, resilience, and a slowly rebuilding sense of self. By the time Maya turned 18, she had completed her high school equivalency exam with honors. With support from a special scholarship fund established for survivors of abuse, she enrolled in community college courses, taking most of them online so she could remain close to her daughter. I'm studying psychology, she told Dr. Pierce during one of their occasional check-ins. I want to understand what happened to me, to my father. And maybe someday, I want to help other kids who are going through what I went through. Baby Elizabeth, now a toddler with curious eyes and her mother's determined spirit, thrived under the combined care of Maya and Catherine. Despite the circumstances of her conception, she was surrounded by love and protection, the kind that Maya herself had been denied for so long. On the 3rd anniversary of her escape from Robert Wilson's house, Maya visited Westbrook Community Clinic. She had arranged to meet privately with Dr. Pierce, bringing a small, wrapped gift. I wanted to thank you again, she said, handing him the package, for seeing what no one else saw. Inside was a framed photograph of Maya and Elizabeth at the beach, their faces bright with laughter as waves crashed around their ankles. Beneath the photo was an inscription. For Dr. Pierce, who taught me that being seen can be a gift, not a danger. With eternal gratitude, Maya and Elizabeth. Dr. Pierce felt his eyes mist over as he examined the photograph. How are you really doing, Maya? He asked. She considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had become characteristic of her. I still have bad days, she admitted. Days when I'm angry about everything that was taken from me. Days when I'm terrified that I'll somehow mess up Elizabeth's life." She paused, looking out the window of Dr. Pierce's office to the parking lot where her aunt waited with Elizabeth. "But I also have good days. Days when I feel almost normal, whatever that means." "Normal is overrated," Dr. Pierce said with a gentle smile. "Extraordinary seems to suit you better." Maya laughed, a sound that would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier in that same clinic. "I don't know about extraordinary. I'm just trying to build something good out of everything that happened." As she prepared to leave, Maya hesitated at the door. "Do you think—" she began, then stopped, reformulating her thought. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't come to the clinic that day? If you hadn't ordered that ultrasound?" Dr. Pierce had indeed wondered this many times over the years, usually in the quiet hours of the night when sleep eluded him. "I try not to think about the what-ifs," he said carefully. "In this job you learn to focus on what you can do today, not what might have happened yesterday." Maya nodded, understanding the unspoken weight of his words. "Well, I'm glad it was your clinic I ended up at. I'm glad you were the one who saw me." After she left, Dr. Pierce sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the photograph of Maya and Elizabeth. In his 26 years of practice, he had seen thousands of patients, diagnosed countless conditions, delivered good news and bad. But few cases had affected him as deeply as Maya Wilson's. It wasn't just that he had helped save her life, though that was significant. It was that her case had reminded him of the profound responsibility and privilege inherent in his profession, the ability to see people at their most vulnerable, to recognize suffering even when it was carefully concealed, and to act as a bridge between despair and hope. He placed the framed photograph on his desk, where it would serve as a daily reminder of why details mattered, why creating space for silence was sometimes as important as asking the right questions, and why the most crucial diagnosis might be the one that existed between the lines of a medical chart. Meanwhile, in a small house on the outskirts of Westbrook, Maya tucked her daughter into bed. "Time for a story, Lizzie Bear," she said, settling into the rocking chair beside the toddler's bed. Elizabeth, already clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, looked up with eager eyes. "The princess story," Maya smiled. She had created a series of bedtime stories about a brave princess who escaped from a dark tower and built a castle of her own. Stories that helped her process her own journey, while giving her daughter heroes to admire. "Once upon a time," Maya began, her voice strong and clear in the quiet room, "there was a princess who lived in a tower so tall that no one could hear her calling for help." As she continued the familiar tale, Maya glanced around the cozy bedroom with its cheerful yellow walls and star-patterned curtains. This life, imperfect, challenging, but fundamentally free, had seemed impossible to her once. Yet here she was, creating a future that belonged to her alone, one day and one choice at a time. The princess in the story would escape the tower, as she always did. She would face dragons and storms and doubts, but she would keep moving forward, building something new from the ruins of what had been taken. And in the end, she would discover that her voice, once silenced, had the power to change not just her own story, but the stories of others. It was fiction, of course, wrapped in the comforting metaphors of fairy tales. But like all the best stories, it contained a kernel of truth, a truth that Maya was living every day, that even after the deepest trauma, healing was possible, that being seen and heard could be the first step toward freedom, and that sometimes the most profound courage was simply the willingness to begin again. As Elizabeth's eyes grew heavy with sleep, Maya finished the story with the princess building a home by the sea, where the windows were always open and the doors had locks that only she controlled. "And she lived happily ever after?" Elizabeth murmured sleepily. Maya leaned down to kiss her daughter's forehead. "She lived truthfully ever after," she corrected gently. "And that's even better than happy." In the years that followed, Maya Wilson's story would be told and retold, in courtrooms and classrooms, in training sessions and therapy groups, in quiet conversations between doctors and nurses who sensed something wrong but weren't sure how to proceed. Her journey from silence to speech, from isolation to connection, from victim to survivor, would serve as both warning and inspiration. It would remind those who heard it that abuse thrives in silence and secrecy, that the most vulnerable victims are often the least able to ask for help, and that noticing, truly noticing, can be a revolutionary act. But perhaps the most important retelling happened in the private moments between a mother and her daughter, as Maya gradually, age-appropriately, shared her own history with Elizabeth. Not to burden her, but to empower her with the truth of where she came from, and the knowledge that difficulty could be overcome, that wounds could heal, that voices could be reclaimed. "Why did you name me Elizabeth?" her daughter asked on her 10th birthday, old enough now to understand that her name carried special significance. Maya, now a practicing child psychologist with a small but growing practice, considered how to answer. "I named you after my mother," she said carefully. "Your grandmother. She tried to save me once, and, in a way, knowing you were coming saved me too." Elizabeth, thoughtful like her mother, absorbed this information. "Do you think she would have liked me?" "Oh, Lizzie," Maya said, pulling her daughter close. "She would have adored you, and she would have been so proud of us both." Later that night, after the birthday candles had been blown out and the presents unwrapped, Maya stood in her backyard, looking up at the stars. 10 years had passed since her escape from Robert Wilson's house. 10 years of rebuilding, of therapy, of learning how to be a mother without having been properly mothered herself. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and struggles, moments when the weight of her past threatened to overwhelm her present. But there had also been joy, pure, unexpected joy that sometimes caught her by surprise with its intensity. "We made it, Mom," she whispered to the night sky. "I wish you could see us now." In the quiet darkness, Maya Wilson, daughter, mother, survivor, took a deep breath and felt the familiar mix of grief and gratitude that had become the backdrop of her life. Grief for what had been lost, for the childhood that had been stolen, for the mother who had died trying to protect her. Gratitude for second chances, for the people who had noticed when she couldn't speak, for the life she had managed to build from the ashes of trauma. She had spent months in silence. But in that examination room, it had taken just one look, and the world had begun to listen. And in listening, in truly seeing her, they had helped her find her way back to her own voice. A voice that now spoke not just for herself, but for all those still trapped in the silence she had escaped. As Maya turned to go back inside, to the home she had created, and the daughter who represented both her deepest wound and her greatest healing, she carried with her the knowledge that had sustained her through the darkest times, that being seen, truly seen, could be the difference between despair and hope, between ending and beginning, between silence and the first whispered word of a story yet to be told.